Hey guys, I'm Mark Allen, BHSpringSolutions LLC, BHSpringSolutions.com. Back again for another session of High Power University, but this is much more than High Power University this time. It's going to have a lot to do with the high power, but much more to do with many more subjects actually. Today we're talking triggers in defensive firearms, and then we're going to go right into the high power design about that very same subject. In the United States, the most populated gun country, or the most gun populated country the planet has ever seen. And if you've noticed where I'm at, I'm at the bottom of the hill at the far corner of my backyard. I've got the agricultural privacy fence behind me, and this is a nice place to come for a heart-to-heart. You know, if that's what's needed on a given day. And 97% of the time in this country, when a violent crime is committed, good guy dies. 3% of the time, bad guy dies. And that is regardless if the good guy has 1 or 100 firearms. And I don't know how much nearer we would need to get to 100% failure for this subject to warrant attention. Clearly, the objective here is to be among the 3%, not among the mass 97%ers. Democracy does not apply here. This subject is not majority rules you, fortunately, and there's definitely not safety in numbers. Not in these numbers anyway. We're going to also keep in mind that about 500 people a year in the United States are killed by unintentional discharges of firearms, and 27,000 more are injured because of unintentional discharges of firearms. So in our discussion about talking triggers and in defensive firearms, those are facts that we're going to be keeping in mind. Today we're talking the subject of trigger actions in various firearms, particularly firearms in duty and defensive roles. And we're going to discuss two opposite schools of thought about that, and we're even going to dig into some historical references that may clarify some things and dispel some myths, maybe about some other things. And because BHSpringSolutions clientele is heavily weighted toward the high power pistol design, we're even going to dig in deep specifically about the nature of the trigger in the high power design. For folks who might be new to this conversation, I'm going to show you some examples of some different triggers, and then we're going to talk about that. This is a John Browning designed 22 long rifle target pistol, and it has what we would call a John Browning trigger. And I'm going to show you the trigger action of this target pistol here real quickly. That's it. And the entire travel of the trigger is limited to only that much. So again, and that's it. Again, that's a John Browning designed 22 target pistol. On my Auto 5 shotgun, on my Takedown 22 rifle that John Browning designed, the triggers are very comparable. They are traditionally kind of deep in the trigger guard area, and on my shotgun and rifle, they're deeper than this. Looks like you don't have range to even pull the trigger actually, but you have room if you have gloves on. And so that's one approach to trigger action. And for many people, this approach is the high preference. In a target shooting situation, if I'm shooting clay pigeons or skeet, or it's a varmint, that needs to get handled. This is a fantastic trigger. I mean, any situation, you know, where you have time to be intentional with your actions, focused, exhale before you pull the trigger. These kind of John Browning triggers are, without question, extremely advantageous. I'm going to show you a couple of more. Here is a Glock trigger, and we've got the BHSpringSolutions tactical safety system, of the manual safety we have for Glock pistols. You see I'm getting no trigger action on that with the safety on. Now with the safety off, I'm going to show you the difference in the trigger action in the Glock. There we go. And it's a, show the reset here. It's definitely a longer trigger travel in many respects, all respects, than Browning's 22 target pistol. I've got a high power pistol here. This has the BH advanced trigger subassembly in it, and all of these have been checked, and there's no ammunition around here. So I want to show you the trigger action in this one. We've got a little take up. We hit a more resistance, and there we go. And we'll go ahead and show the reset of that one as well. And just that much. So, okay, those are three different trigger actions. They're all doing the same thing. They're all making the gun go bang. But differences in trigger travel and resistance on the trigger is present. There is an aspect of this, and one of the things I've talked with a lot to my own personnel is, with respect to this subject, to an extent, I think we all have to find our own salvation. And as long as, and that's a worthwhile seek, as long as you're not seeking to be in the 97%. And as long as you know, the salvation you find doesn't put you in the 97% or keep you in the 97%, it's a worthwhile thing to do, and it may yield some may yield some productive things. I'm going to explain to you how this happened for me. I know that in this handgun, it's one of my very favorites to carry. This happens to be a 40 Smith & Wesson model of the famous FN Browning high power pistol, and I found over years, after I started shooting rapid fire shooting drills, and that about a 5 3/4 pound trigger for me in a high power pistol allows me to deliver maximum quantity with maximum accuracy in the shortest amount of time, and the weapon remains fully controllable for me. In other words, I don't have any situations where I'm settling back down the recoil and my finger on the trigger activates the trigger, and it's like a split second too soon, you know, before I actually intended to. You know, when you're the guy shooting the drills, you know that, even though everybody else may not realize it. And I figured out that for me, what meshes good with my hand coordination, my reflexes, my strength level, what really works for me is a 5 3/4 pound trigger. Now, for the next guy, it's probably going to be different, and because there's no one size fits all in this picture. The important thing about this whole subject, and like, I know a 5 3/4 pound trigger in a high power is a bullseye for everything that is me. The important thing is, if you can, is to try to find it, and then have a firearm that really truly does work for you, you know, in that regard. And you must be prepared to continue making good shots until the attacking threat decides to stop. That's the reason why I bring up rapid firing and the ability to deliver maximum quantity and accuracy in the least amount of time. It is impossible to know what it's going to take to stop a threat, or how many threats there will be. I want to run to the subject of home defense and a some guidance that my partner Slav and I received from him personally. One day, he had actually had an attempted break-in at his home. This is a gentleman I'm going to allow to remain anonymous. I don't think I have the right to share some of this information about him specifically. But he's highly regarded, and we asked him one day, because he had an attempted break-in at his residence, and we asked him, you know, just out of curiosity, what is your by-the-bed gun? And it happened to be one that was actually designed by our chief weapons and modifications designer, Leon Hubert, when he was at FN, and it was actually Leon's or FN's BDA-09. Now, a BDA-09 is basically the BDA-9, which is a modified or double action, single action, and highly reworked high power. But the BDA-O is a double action only. So it's more of a revolver trigger. It's this kind of a long, very excellent double action trigger, but a much longer, heavier trigger regimen. You know, it's kind of at the opposite end of semi-autos than this one. And because, by the way, that's about 1.5 pounds that is in that Browning target pistol. And, you know, we were a little surprised, you know, by his choice. Not because of reliability, you know, by any means, because Leon Hubert's design work in the BDA 380 that he also designed, in the BDA 9, the BDA O. Reliability is a true hallmark. He also designed the FN competition model for high power. And reliability is not a question about this model, but the double action only part, that got our attention, because it seemed to kind of go the opposite direction of the way a lot of people think about this situation today. And when we asked him why, he said, well, when I get woke up in the middle of the night, if that's what happens, and I'm in a deep sleep, and there's usually like a period of time when I'm trying to get my coordination, I'm trying to figure out, you know, is what I heard, was that real, or was that in the dream I was having? You know, cobwebs are in my head, I'm disoriented, my reflexes aren't working right. And he said, the last thing I want to put my hand on is something that is going to fire without real intentionality on my part. And you know, he went on to explain, you know, that you know, in a situation like this, you know, if, you know, something discharges and it's unintentional, whether it's, you know, because of the cobwebs in your head, or because of adrenaline, or because you're scared and your body shakes, or, you know, you get jostled or something, you know, you're responsible for everything that leaves the end of that barrel, intended or unintended. And, you know, some sort of an excuse like, you know, well, I wasn't even awake yet, I didn't even know what I was doing. Well, I mean, that's not going to help you. That bullet and the consequences of it, if that's a hole in the floor, a hole in the wall, or God forbid, a hole in your significant other, that's a bad outcome. And so he was very, very forward thinking into what I would call some reality, that, you know, the by-the-bed gun, you know, none of us can be sure of what sort of condition we're going to be in when we get woke up. It's going to be how deep into REM sleep you are, or how close you are to that deep sleep, or coming out of it, or you know, that's a crapshoot. And so he was really thinking deeply into this, and it got our attention, honestly. And, you know, we really took that in, and that is definitely one way of thinking. And there's I'm going to give you another example of you know, two schools of thought, and this would be one of my employees, who is a retired U.S. Army, and myself. We were talking about this, and I asked him, you know, about, you know, his choices by the bed, you know, and you know, in a defensive firearm. And one of the things that stood out to me is he said, you know, mine are not chambered. Magazines in the pistol, or the you know, shotgun, or whatever it is, but nothing's chambered. And this is a school of thought that matches my school of thought once upon a time. I've changed that. But I understand the reasoning behind it. One is for just, safety in the home. Nothing's chambered, nothing's getting unintentionally discharged. And the other school of thought there is that if there's a threat inside the home and that threat hears that that threat might decide to change its mind, and that solves the problem and leave. And I don't disagree. That outcome is possible. But again, that's one way of thinking about it, and it definitely has chances of working out. I changed my thought about that as the years have gone by, and I do not subscribe to having defensive firearms by my bed that I have to make noise with, because I have decided under no circumstances am I going to give away my position. No way I'm going to give up my own element of surprise if that is what's going down inside my home. And the thing that occurs to me is, whatever went bump in the night, if I rack a slide and the bump knows where that came from, I envision, the opposite side of the wall from the room I'm in getting sprayed with bullets, without even coming into the room. And so, which again, I mean, it's a different way of looking at it. It's a different school of thought, and that's what I've decided is right for me. But that's my plan, and I've chosen that under no circumstances am I going to do anything that's going to give away my position or take away any element of surprise that I would be able to have otherwise on my side, especially in an environment where I know the floor plan, I know where I am, and whatever went bump doesn't know either one of those things. So what I want you to take from this is there's no one right answers. There's no one size fits all about this entire subject. But I think we have to start thinking, and we have to start thinking more and planning more about it, because, quite frankly, that's where not being in the 97% starts, is in starting to think and plan and getting above, frankly, everything that the 97% has been doing, because it's not been working out, or producing, results that in most people's mind would constitute success. Now, how many times have you heard this? I'm going to take this just a little different direction, because, there is a school of thought too that, if I have a defensive firearm and I have a trigger like this, it's minimal trigger action, I'm going to make better shots, and like this. The other school of thought is this is a very, very easy trigger for adrenaline to activate, and any trigger with that kind of short trigger travel could be. So the different direction I want to take this is going to surprise most people. If you have been a student of High Power University, if you've studied, if you listened really closely, this is not going to be new news, but I'm betting 99% plus of everybody who listens to this is going to be new knowledge. And so I think you're going to find this interesting. The high power trigger, the high power does not have a John Browning trigger. That's what I think we have heard more times than I can probably count. And the actual fact is it's not true. And let me explain. The high power pistol was derived from another handgun that was patented, which actually constitutes 45 patents, 45 different components, orientation of components, and cooperation between components that constitutes 45 different specific patents inside a patent for the firearm that was the predecessor to the high power. We only know it today as the 1927 Grand Regiment because it never did go into actual mass production, but here is the patent. And here's what I'm going to just do real quickly. I want to run to page 6. By the way, you can look this up online if you Google patent. The patent number is 1,618,510. Patented date February 22, 1927. On page 6, Mr. Browning described what he had invented into this pistol, and I'm just going to read for you just a little bit. It says, "This construction provides in a convenient and simple form for a," he called it a double pull, which he put in quotes because it was, I guess, for lack of a better explanation, but he goes on to explain it, "whereby the user of the arm is warned of the approximate point in the pull of the trigger when the firing pin will be released." And that's really what you have here, is you have a small take-up portion here, just very minimal, and that is one resistance, and then you come to much more resistance. Now the finger must intentionally pull harder in order to make that happen. And that's exactly what he's talking about here. In that same paragraph on page 6, the same paragraph, it says, "This necessity for an increased pull on the trigger gives the shooter warning of the time of release of the firing pin." So if you've ever said the high power does not have a John Browning trigger, not only is that not correct and factual, it is John Browning's last trigger design of his life, was how the nature of the high power trigger. Guess what? Gaston copied it too. This trigger in the Glock, as we see, we pull rearward, and as we're pulling rearward, we encounter increased resistance, just like Browning talked about. And we keep going, and that increased resistance, and it's right there, that is your warning that that's about to happen. And never knew it, that a Glock actually has a John Browning trigger. And folks, he got a patent for that. When you go back to the section of specifically what he was seeking patents for, and let me show you, that's a better profile picture of the 1927 Grand Regiment in a drawing. There's also pictures of that available online. There's a prototype at the Browning Museum in Ogden, Utah. And in the last several pages, he starts 45 different things for which he was requesting a patent, and he explained that the particular firearm that was getting the patent was basically the platform that he was using in order to get all of those other things patented, because those could be transferred individually or in numbers to other firearms designs, which they have been. Item number 39, the 39th patent item that he mentions here, is means for operatively connecting said trigger. I'm going in the middle of this. The means whereby the point of contact between said trigger lever, said lever, and said sear, talking about the sear lever, is during the pull of the trigger shifted in such a manner as to decrease the leverage exerted by the said lever and thereby necessitate an increased pull on the trigger as the moment of uncocking the firing member is approached. So, folks, in John Browning's own words, if you have been guilty, like I've probably been a few times before High Power University started, of saying, you know, the only problem with the high power is it doesn't have a John Browning trigger. Well, yes, it does. Now, the quality of the John Browning trigger that you have in your high power, that's kind of the negotiable part. I want to talk to you a little bit. We want to talk a little bit at this point about the BH Advanced trigger, and we have the BH Advanced trigger in this particular high power. That is a BHSpringSolutions designed, manufactured, and marketed product, and it's the only alternative whole trigger subassembly redesigned for the high power pistol that exists. And I want to show you some of the things that we did to it, but more importantly, I want to tell you how you can use this trigger to find your own salvation when it comes to what trigger resistance meshes really works for you. Not as just good to this guy or that guy, or you know what you think is good, but what actually is good and works for you when you're rapid firing under pressure, a timed situation where you're trying to beat your last time. That causes adrenaline, because and frankly, adrenaline doesn't know whether you're trying to beat the clock or beat the bad guy. So I like to practice that way. I think it's a good way. You know, I get pretty competitive, and when I get competitive, my adrenaline starts going, and pretty soon, you know, I'm only competing against myself in my last best time, but it's a duplication of, in a way, I do believe, what would be going on in the body, at least a little, in a defensive situation where all of a sudden the adrenaline, you know, is, you know, running way up. The BH Advanced Trigger sub-assembly for high powers, it did a couple of other things I'll show you. That is magazine eject assist. There's no mousetrap spring on here. And our trigger has a magazine eject assist spring that does not impact the trigger when the magazine is in the pistol, but it does help the magazine leave. And that can be better for fast mag changes. We did a lot of work as far as getting the resistance, you know, off of the traditional trigger so that there would be a more pure, the finger can feel the real action and not, you know, resistance coming artificially from here and there. One of the things that we did was we enhanced the room for the trigger return spring. And by doing that, we were able to use more different diameters of spring wire to make that trigger return spring. And that is really your resistance on this part of the trigger pull. Well, the whole trigger pull, but it's all of your resistance in that take-up portion. And what 4 different trigger return springs does for you is, from lightest to heaviest, each one heavier or lighter you go, you get about a ½ pound more or less resistance. So you've got about a 2-pound window only on trigger return springs in the BH Advanced Trigger subassembly, and you can go from one to the other and you can try and see, you know, what works for you. And if you take this subject, you know, seriously, if you really want to know where your sweet spot is, what kind of a trigger break really works for you. And yes, this gets back to that subject of being in the 97% or being in the 3%. And I'm going to assume that more in the 97% would never consider this than probably, you know, those that are fortunate enough to be in the 3%. But that was one of the things that the BH Advanced Trigger subassembly did for us and for BH veterans and for users, was with a spring, it makes it possible for you to have about a ½ pound more or less, 1 pound, pound and a half, and up to 2 pounds difference between the lightest and the heaviest. All of them offer good trigger reset, but that's the only way I know that any man finds, or woman finds, his sweet spot or the salvation on the subject of what's my optimal trigger break weight, is to try it, and particularly try it under some stress, under some rapid fire situations where you're trying to deliver a lot of shots, 5, 7, 9, something like that, into a rather modest target, at, you know, a reasonable distance, 5 yards, 7 yards, 8 yards, something like that. And so that's another thing that came from the BH Advanced Trigger. You're also going to notice one other thing, and that is in the traditional high power trigger, you had the trigger was more like right where my finger is, and it tended to have this kind of a slope to it. And when you watch your finger with it, you have this down and back motion. And what we've done is we've placed the trigger slightly deeper in the trigger lever, in the trigger guard area, and it's much more of a straight pullback. Now, unconsciously, the trigger finger and reflexes prefer a straight pullback than a down and back, you know, pull. So that was the reason why we did that. It did follow John Browning's design in his target pistol, which again, see the trigger placement of the trigger, it is a very, very pure straight back kind of a trigger pull proposition. Léon Hubert, who designed the SFS system that you can carry your high power or 1911 with the hammer forward, safeties cam up, pull the safety off, hammer cocks, it's ready to fire. Again, the guy who is the claim to fame of the BDA 380, which also, you know, kind of, you know, became the Beretta 84. The BDA 9, and so many other things. The safety here on this Glock that is exclusive at BHSpringSolutions. We asked him about this exact same subject, and specifically about the high powers trigger, and, you know, this degree of trigger travel, which again is very modest, and that's it. His words were this: it is very good to have a short movement of the trigger before the shot, but and he was speaking specifically about the nature of the high power trigger, and he's really talking John Browning's language here as far as the reasons why John Browning designed the high power trigger the way he did. And that is, again, it is very good to have a short movement of the trigger before the shot, but it is necessary to keep that displacement before the shot, which allows the shooter to align the target and to have a little time to think before the irreparable. And I love the way French, and because he is a French-speaking man, I love the way French translates to English sometimes, because I got to tell you, I think that one sentence says an awful lot, and a lot to consider. And you know, again, maybe a little deeper, maybe a little higher level of thinking in this subject than you know, some of what we're used to, you know, and it's got to be, you know, always has to be a trigger like this, you know, well, and there's no, believe me, I'm not knocking John Browning's trigger in this target pistol. It's a target pistol, and in a target situation where, you know, there's no adrenaline much, and there's, you know, you're relaxed and focused on everything, and you breathe right, and you exhale right time, and it's a fantastic trigger, no kidding. As I'm seeing it, to not be a 97%er, that requires thinking and planning that gets above that 97% level to a higher level than what the 97% has been doing, frankly. And folks, I hope something has been said. It's our intention in this presentation that is a stimulus for you to think, and maybe if there's just one way you can take the best and leave the rest, and if you are able to optimize or improve one thing in your own defensive preparedness, in your own firearms, in your own choices, then this time that you've spent here with us today is well invested. And folks, we appreciate you. This is a session of High Power University, but it's much more than that. And folks, we thank you for joining us. I am Mark Allen, BHSpringSolutions LLC, BHSpringSolutions.com for High Power University. Thank you.